All right, everybody, I want to welcome you. I am Kimberly Martin with Steinbergscapes, the 2021 Professional Women in Building Council Chair. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Professional Women in Building advocates for, supports, and inspires women in the building industry by providing opportunities for both professional and personal development, as well as engagement of our members. Today's luncheon is going to be a great example of that. For those of you that don't know me or haven't met me, I'd like to say hello to everybody. I've been involved in Professional Women in Building for a number of years, and there's tremendous advantages to it. I mean, there's great networking, there are great luncheons and personal and educational benefits. But for me, the biggest reason that I love Professional Women in Building is because I've got a great support structure of women and a few smart gentlemen that join us. Because I know if I run into something or run into a problem, there are a ton of people that can help me out, that are there to support me and give me cheers or to help me with a helping hand. So we obviously would love for anybody that is on this webinar that's not a member of the council to be part of it. Over the next year, we basically will have a number of networking events, hopefully in person. We'll have lunches with influential speakers. We're going to have opportunities to support your community, also be involved in stewardships, and a lot more. Feel free to reach out to me, and I believe my email will be up on the screen here shortly, or Nicole Early, who is our membership council's chair. The next PWB event after this webinar is the Shaken Not Stirred on March 2nd. It'll be via Zoom from 4 to 5 p.m. It's a great opportunity to network. When we do it in person, we get anywhere from 20 to 50 people. On the Zoom, we've been getting somewhere between 15 and 25 people. But the Shaken Not Stirreds are held the first Tuesday of every month. It's free to attend, and everybody is welcome. And like I said, we can't wait to actually be able to host this in person again once we get out of the situation that we're in. We are lucky and grateful to have a sponsor who constantly supports PWB and the events that we hold. I'd like to introduce Kim Murphy with Earn West to say a few words.
Thanks, Kimberly. That took me a minute to figure out how to unmute myself here. God, we go through as many practices as we want, but it still doesn't work on it. You know, we really appreciate the opportunity to sponsor the Professional Women in Building webinar and luncheons. I do miss the luncheons. I always think you guys put on a great event. You all do a great job with the speakers, and I am looking forward to today. So like Kimberly mentioned, I'm from Earn West, and we specialize in the riveting world of Washington workers' compensation. We actually manage the MBA effective rating program. So if you're not familiar with retro, it is the only way for companies to earn some of their premium that they pay back to that they pay to labor and industries. So if you're curious about retro or like safety or how to save money or maybe frustrated with labor and industries, we are here to help. So reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more. Anyway, thank you again for the opportunity, and I will bring it back to Kimberly.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim and Earn West. We really do appreciate your support. Today, we have a great webinar planned. I do want to say during the presentation, if you have any questions for Andrew during the presentation, please put them in the chat box, and we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. For those of you that don't know Andrew Ballard, he is a respected author, educator, keynote, and TEDx speaker. He has helped hundreds of public, private, and nonprofit organizations, both from startups through Fortune 500 companies, achieve breakthrough growth. His book, entitled Your Opinion Doesn't Matter, has been endorsed in both the corporate and academic circles as being innovative and insightful. Andrew is also a part-time facility member, if I can speak today, sorry, faculty member of the University of Washington School of Business. Andrew?
I am here. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Kimberly. And we've got a little bit of stuttering in terms of the audio. And for that reason, I'm going to turn my video off. Kimberly, are you hearing me without the audio stuttering?
I'm not hearing any audio stuttering at all, Andrew.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Maybe I'll leave my camera on and I'll ask one of my co-hosts to jump in if we start getting latency or cutting out in the audio. But it's exciting for me to be back. I did a presentation to the PWB, actually at Master Builders. We had a lunch and it was right after my TEDx talk, and I did a talk on my topic. And this topic is quite different, and I'm very excited because it's very relevant. Unfortunately, it's kind of forced upon us just based on, our new pandemic economy. And so my opening slide here essentially is a quote from Abraham Lincoln. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And so that's maybe a little bit easier said than done, but that's exactly what I'm going to focus on, is show you how we actually go through a process to determine what the likely future through scenario planning will be. Another one of my favorite quotes is from Yogi Berra, baseball Hall of Famer. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. And he is a prolific pontificator, kind of a funny guy. So I'd like to start off by doing a poll just so I can get to know you better. So our host is going to launch the poll right now. And there's actually 3 questions on this poll. And I'm going to encourage everyone to participate. It is anonymous. We won't know what your answers are, but it will help me know who I'm speaking with. So the first question, have you ever been involved in strategic planning? Yes or no? And again, I want everybody to participate. Otherwise, this will do me no good. The second question is, how long have you been in business or in your current line of work? Less than 1, 2 to 5, 6 to 10 years or more, or over 6 years. And then finally, the third question is, what are your current annual revenues? So it'll give me an idea of the size of your organization. Again, less than $1 million, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 10 million, or over 10 million. So I'm going to ask you all to vote right now. And I'm going to give it another 15 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and share the results. So please, everyone, jump in. Pretty simple, straightforward, but it'll really help me know what's going on. So let's go ahead and share the results of our poll. And the poll, there they are. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So 85% of you have done strategic planning. That's great, because the very end of scenario planning takes us back to strategic planning. And over 10 years is the predominant answer at 62%. And we've got some people 2 to 5. So we don't have anybody brand new. And most of our group is under $1 million, with a percentage of the rest. So I really appreciate that. That'll help me focus on sharing examples of, that'll be relevant to you all. So the question I always ask is, or I get asked rather, and that is scenario planning really that important? And my response is always the same. Well, you have 2 choices. I mean, you can pull back and hope it'll get better, like with the current condition we're in. And by the way, hope is not a strategy. I'm sure many of you have heard that. Or 2, you can push forward. More importantly, you can push forward with purpose. We're going to push forward strategically. So really the premise of scenario planning is that if you are aware of what could happen, you will likely be better prepared to deal with what will happen. And this is a 5-step process that will help you not only identify some scenarios, but do so in a way where they'll be likely to occur. So let's jump right in. Quickly, the purpose of scenario planning. It is part of the strategic planning family. However, the approach is very different, and it is used when you are in an environment of significant uncertainty. It's really difficult to understand what's about to happen or what those future scenarios, how they may impact your organization. It also involves making assumptions on what the future will be. And again, we're going to do it in a way that improve our batting average and how your business environment will change over time. And next, essentially, it's a swag instead of a wag. For those of you that don't know what a wag is, it stands for a wild ass guess. But this is a swag, and that stands for a strategic wild ass guess. So the likelihood of it being correct is much better. Anyway, finally, scenario planning aims to define the critical uncertainties, develop plausible scenarios, and what your organization's strategic response will be to each of the most likely scenarios. So I'm going to first, before breaking down those 5 stages, I would like to show the difference between strategic planning and scenario planning because they are very different, which will be very apparent here. So strategic planning is fairly routine and happens on reoccurring intervals. Some people do strategic planning every year. Some people will put together a 2 or 3 year plan, but there's a regular algorithm that we can count on. With scenario planning, it's extraordinary and it's situation based. And I can't think of a condition that our society has been in where scenario planning wasn't more important. By the way, I'm going to go through my presentation and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. We've left a lot of time for that. So please do continue to share your questions. I see we've already got 15 chats. That's awesome. You can use the Q&A bubble, or you can use the chat, whatever is your preference. So with strategic planning, you start out with a vision and you're working towards achieving that vision. With scenario planning, it's the inverse. You end up with a vision, usually a new vision, how to deal with very difficult conditions like a pandemic. Strategic planning, you've already got metrics in place. With scenario planning, new metrics will emerge. Strategic planning, we have solid data with known conditions. Strategic planning, scenario planning, we really lack the data and the conditions are not known. And so we do a lot of marketing research and strategic planning and growth strategy in our business. And when you have data, and we rely on data to make better informed decisions, you've got to know that the data is a report card. Even if the data is 1 day fresh, it's looking at the past. Scenario planning is designed to game or estimate the future. Strategic planning, we're dealing with opportunities, but with scenario planning, we're trying to deal with risk. So strategic, it's based on what we want to seize. And with scenario planning, it's really more based on what we need to overcome. Lastly, strategic planning is about growth. Scenario planning is far more focused on survival. And I'll talk a little bit more about other applications you can use for scenario planning when we get towards the end of the presentation. So here's the 5-stage process. Pardon me. The first stage is to define your focal issue. And essentially, you're going to document the question, the problem, the situation, or the issue that needs to be addressed. And you're also going to frame it with a time horizon. There needs to be a time frame associated to it. Second, and by the way, I'm going to do a deep dive and do more detail in all of this, but I thought it would be best to show you the entire framework first. Number 2, identify driving forces. So essentially, you and your team, if you are a single owner operator, find a mirror, point a finger. But a lot of us have people in our team, and we want to engage them in a brainstorming process. We're going to brainstorm external conditions that are outside of our control that may affect our issue, the situation, or our organization. And by the way, scenario planning works well regardless if you're public. A lot of governments do this. They have a much longer time horizon than private companies. I've done this with governments. I've done this with privately held firms, and I've done this with nonprofits. So the tool is ubiquitous regardless of your business sector. Number 3 is to determine the critical uncertainties. So we want to narrow down our brainstormed list to just the top 2 based on what we believe will have the greatest impact on our organization. 4th is to develop plausible scenarios. So we're going to build a matrix, and I'm going to not only show you what the matrix looks like, but I'm actually going to take a real life example of a company that used this to populate the matrix so you can see how the matrix is used, from building it from the ground up and actually what it looks like when it's fully populated. But essentially, we're using those 2 critical uncertainties as axes, essentially your X and Y axis in a traditional chart. And we're going to develop the most likely scenarios. And as we go through this, you'll see that it becomes more obvious on how all of these stages work together. And then finally, we're going to establish strategic responses based on the 4 most likely scenarios. The matrix is a quadrant matrix. So we're going to develop the most likely 4 scenarios, and then we're going to develop our organization's responses to what we believe will be either the single most likely scenario or possibly the top 2. Some people actually develop strategic responses to all of them. And in this example, we will develop a very brief strategic response for all, but the one scenario we believe will be most likely, that's when we kind of revert back to our strategic planning model and come up with an action plan to deal with the situation that we're in. Okay, so here is the deeper dive. So again, number 1, define the focal issue. It's really important that you document this. So you're going to document the question, the problem, or the issue that needs to be addressed. And essentially, you're going to frame it in a short statement. So this would be a short, simple statement, and it should include, whenever we can, a time frame. And again, this is a very simple step, so we don't want to overcomplicate it. We're just framing a very short statement. So I'd like to give you some examples. I usually suggest 20 words or less. All of my examples are 13, 14, 15 words. So the 20-word limit isn't that constraining. So here are a few examples. So, and these are all ones that I've seen in business. So our building was just sold, our lease is up in 6 months, and we have no idea if the new owner is going to extend our lease. And so that's a focal issue that will keep you centered on the remaining 4 processes. Another example is a new competitor emerged, and they're selling a very similar product line. And so we want to know, what will the impact be with somebody coming into our space this year? And then finally, one that we've seen all too often, and where a lot of my scenario planning's been focused, is the pandemic has cut our revenues by 75%. And by the way, this is the one that I will be using. It is a restaurant. And we don't know how long this impact will last. You know, when the governor shut us down on the 23rd of March, it was a 2-week shutdown. None of us in our wildest dreams, or more like nightmares, could have guessed that this thing would still be in play. And then, you know, 3 months ago, we start to open up again, and then we shut down again. And it's very difficult for especially those in hospitality, tourism, restaurants, that kind of a thing. They're the ones that really have been hardest hit. But construction's been hit too, those of us in buildings. So it's an equal opportunity abuser. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how simple and straightforward your focal issue statement should be. Just really straightforward, simple to do, shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. By the way, I have actually facilitated an entire scenario planning process with a board of directors, and we've done the entire thing with the exception of the action plan. We've gone through all 5 steps in 90 minutes. One of the complaints about scenario planning is that it takes weeks and weeks and months and sometimes years to plan. Well, I got news for you. They're not doing it right. You should be able to do this in a couple hours, and bring your team together and maybe schedule a couple 2-hour sessions. And then once you have identified the most likely scenario, that's when you can start building an action plan around it. And that would be, maybe a third 1-hour session. So number 2, identifying driving forces. And by the way, the first 3 stages in this populate the last 2. So every one of them are integrated. This is a sequential process. You can't jump over a stage. Number 2, identifying driving forces. Bring your team together, and we do it in a retreat style. And I've done this before COVID. I've been paid for strategic planning since 1993, which is about the last time I saw a barber, but that's neither here or there. But the point is that you're going to brainstorm a list of external conditions that may have an impact on the situation, the issue that you're dealing with, or your organization. And what we use is a tool that's also referred to as an environmental scan, and it's called a pest analysis. And the pest analysis is to stimulate ideas, not to limit your thinking. But the acronym PEST stands for political, economic, social, and technological. So for political, that's big P, right? That's legislative, administrative, judicative, regulative. It's anything in our local, state, or federal government that can have an impact on us, right? And if that impact is positive, it's considered an opportunity. If it's negative, which a lot of people are feeling, some of the ways that the governments are handling this are really having a negative impact on their enterprise. And I completely get it. In addition to pest, because I'm a marketing guy at heart, I also include consumer and competitor. You can't control consumers, their buying behavior. You can't control their disposable income. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people that didn't lose their jobs are dealing with furloughs. And so there isn't quite as much money in the marketplace. And so that has an impact on, I'm sure that many of you, especially those of you that are, doing remodeling, my guess is that there might have been some of your projects that got put on hold. Hopefully they're now coming back. We experienced some of the same carnage that all of you have. We lost 75% of our projects by the end of March. Fortunately, almost all of them have come back, and we've had some new clients that have come back. And so we're back up to full throttle again, but we had some lean months anyway. So, but include consumers and competitors, consumers of your product or service, and those competing directly with you. Moving on here, so a little bit more information. Most of us have taken part in traditional brainstorming, and I have facilitated over 500 sessions like this, and I can tell you that 95% of everyone I've ever facilitated doesn't do brainstorming the right way. Someone will come up with an idea and they talk about it. That's not brainstorming. That's conversation. So traditional brainstorming is rapid pace. There's no discussion or judgment. There are no bad ideas, and you document everybody's ideas and you go through it as quickly as possible. So you want to select somebody in your organization to act as a facilitator, to keep the exercise moving, or to keep to keep the team on track. Can't tell you how many times I've said, hey, rapid pace, no discussion. Somebody will bring something up, And I go, wait, no, we're not discussing it. That'll be step 3. Let's just keep it moving. So you really need a gatekeeper to really keep things moving. Also, you may want to adopt what we call as a headline exercise. And the reason it's called a headlines exercise is that most headlines are between 4 and 7 words. And so we do this when we were doing it in person, we were doing it on flip charts. And you can get 4 to 7 words on one bullet with, about 1.5 inch writing so everybody can read it. Now we're doing it on spreadsheets, sharing screens, and everybody can see it. But I recommend that you employ the headlines exercise approach because it speeds things up. I also recommend that you limit your brainstorming to 10 minutes. Frankly, if you're really doing this right and it's just boom, 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 people are throwing out ideas, you can get through this in probably 5 minutes. I'm suggesting that you document up to 25 ideas or headlines and not more. And again, having done this 500 times, I can tell you that by the time you can get 25 ideas or headlines on 2 flip charts with, large writing, it's really simple to do. And what I've experienced early on in my career is that when you got to the 3rd flip chart, none of them bubbled up to the top. None of them were prioritized. People were just trying too hard. Your best ideas are going to be top of mind, and someone's going to say something that triggers an idea of yours. Rapid pace, 10 minutes, no more than 25 ideas. It's a great way to control the process. Okay, here's where we get judgy. Here's where we have conversations and kind of tear down people's ideas. We don't tear people down, we tear down the ideas, to be clear. So the 3rd stage is to determine critical uncertainties. So essentially the process is we're going to narrow down your team's brainstormed list to the top 2 based on those top 2 having the greatest potential impact on the situation you're dealing with, on your organization, the problem you're dealing with, the issue, etc. And so I'll go through our prioritization process. It works very well. But this really is when you can have a discussion about each one of them. And this, this exercise by itself could easily take 15, 20 minutes. If you limit yourself to 25, you can do this in 20 minutes. But essentially, you're going to go through every one of them to make sure that everybody understands the intent of each headline, because you can't vote on something you don't understand, but you get the idea. So let me give you some examples of how we prioritize a brainstorm list. And again, these are all based on lean principles, so it really speeds up the process. It doesn't denigrate the quality, but again, you don't need to spend days, weeks, and months doing this. Probably my average amount of time in doing this in facilitation is a 2-hour process. And the benefit, the cost benefit to spending those 2 hours with your leadership team are well worth it, because in almost every case, it accelerates revenue generation. And when you're not generating as much revenue as you're used to, getting that back on track is very important. So the first thing you do after everybody makes sure that everybody understands the 25 headlines or these ideas, you're going to look at them and you're going to delete or group similar ideas, that are kind of in the same genre or the same frame. And that's going to get you down to a shorter list. So you're also going to delete ideas that really aren't relevant to the problem or the situation you're trying to solve. In brainstorming, we're not judging, we're just trying to throw stuff up there. But in this 3rd stage, in determining critical uncertainties, this is when we get judgy and pull stuff out. After we've deleted or grouped similar ideas, if you've got 3 headlines that are basically in the same camp, bring them together as a single headline. Get rid of those that are not perfectly irrelevant. And so here's the great process that works so well. And I know I've got a few clients that are in this webinar, and they've experienced my sticky dot maddom. I'm crazy about sticky dots. But you take that shorter list the remaining headlines or ideas up there, and you're going to prioritize them. And you prioritize them with sticky dots. And yes, we've been able to virtualize our sticky dots. So this is the way we do it. And it's the way I recommend it, because each dot is weighted. So everybody gets 3 dots. They get a dot with a 1 on it, a dot with a 2 on it, and a dot with a 3 on it. Now you can do this virtually too. It doesn't have to be on site. So when they're looking at that shorter list, after you kind of pared things down, maybe your 25 is down to, 10 to 15 items. You're going to look at those 10 to 15 items and you're going to say, which one of those do we think is going to have potentially the highest impact on what we're trying to do or what problem we're solving for. And so that 1 dot is your first place vote. You take your second dot on, if you had a list of 15, on the remaining 14, and you place the dot with the 2 on it on your second favorite headline. When I say favorite, meaning that it has the potential of having the greatest impact. And then you take your number 3 dot and put that on the process as well. We do this in spreadsheets. It's really simple. And on the same line, the same row in the spreadsheet that we type the headlines, next to it is a column of voting. But here's the deal. Your 1 dot, your first place dot, counts as 3 points. Your second place choice, your second dot counts as 2 points. And your third place selection counts as 1 dot. And so not only does everybody in the brainstorming team get to prioritize, but their prioritization with those 3 dots are weighted. And the reason we do weighting is because you don't end up with ties anywhere near as often. And so then with everybody voting, you tabulate, and spreadsheets are great at tabulating. You can tabulate highest number to low number, and it brings everything together. And you take those top 2 highest vote getting ideas, and we're going to change those headlines or those ideas. We're going to start using the critical uncertainty language. So this is the process you go through to land on your top 2 critical uncertainties. And so by now, you're at about the 45-minute level of your meeting here, possibly an hour. It depends on how much time you need to spend. But as I said, the first 3 populate the last 2 stages. So let's get on to those. Number 4, develop plausible scenarios. So now we're done setting the foundation. Now we're actually doing the work. So using your matrix, which I will show you in a moment, with the top 2 critical uncertainties as your axes, right? Your top one is going to be the y-axis, number 1, which is the top, that's the vertical axis. And your second place critical uncertainty is going to be the x-axis at the bottom of your chart, or at the bottom of this quadrant matrix. And from there, you're going to develop the most likely scenarios, one for each of the quadrants. Each quadrant, based on your 2 critical uncertainties, will have different outcomes that will help you make assumptions about a likely future. And when you see all this come together, you go, oh, I can see how that would improve my batting average. So here is a matrix. Again, it's just a simple 4-quadrant matrix, okay? And so here, it doesn't matter whether the vertical is number 1 and the horizontal is number 2, because they have equal weighting. So it doesn't matter where you put them, but you've got critical uncertainty number 1, critical uncertainty number 2, and the bottom part of the matrix are negative outcomes. The top row are positive. The left side of the matrix are negative outcomes, and the right side of the matrix are positive. So in scenario 1, essentially, you have positive outcomes for both of your critical uncertainties. If you go over to scenario 2, you're on the negative side of the matrix for the vertical, or what your y-axis, but you, excuse me, in that case, it would be you would be negative on your y-axis, which is the bottom, but you'd be positive on the other axis. So again, y-axis is vertical, x-axis is horizontal. So this is a negative on the y-axis, and it's a positive, excuse me, on the x-axis, and it's a positive on the y-axis. So that's why you would have a negative and a positive. If you move, boy, I'm doing a great job of explaining this. I hope I'm not confusing you. If you move over to scenario 3, essentially you are positive in terms of your y-axis, which is one of your critical uncertainties, and you're negative in terms of, excuse me, the bottom is x, the vertical is y. And so you've got a positive negative relationship. And if you are in the 4th scenario quadrant, it's negative outcome and negative outcome. So you're negative on both of the critical uncertainties. And again, I will populate this after I show you the 5th stage here. So after you have all 4 quadrants filled up based on the critical uncertainties, what you're going to do then is to develop your organization's strategic response for each of those 4 scenarios. So I want you to think about a worst case scenario, which would be negative, negative, business as usual, which, may be positive, negative, or negative, positive, and think about your best case scenario, and that would be scenario 1, where it's positive, positive. So essentially, another consideration is that your situation may move from one scenario to another as conditions changes, right? I can't think of the 4-phased approach that our state is using as an example of changing conditions, right? I mean, we went to phase 2 or phase 2.5, where restaurants could take up to 50% of their dining inside, to shutting it back to phase 1.5, which means no inside dining, but you can do distance seating outside. Well, that outside seating doesn't work for every restaurant. The point is that that is an example of somebody's situation changing, the pandemic phases. Also, once you determine the most likely scenario, then you're going to expand your strategic response with an action plan. I had shared that earlier. And if you feel more than one scenario could likely play out, develop an action plan for your top 2 or your top 3. I can tell you that governments like municipalities use scenario planning when they develop their comprehensive plan, and all comp plans are 20 years. That's mandated by the state. And then they have refreshes to those plans every 7 years. Right now, we're in an 8-year cycle because of the pandemic, but they're looking way out. Cities are trying to identify what their city environment is going to be 20 years out. We're not doing that. We're looking over at 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. Unfortunately, we keep surfacing new variants of this virus, and that could extend this play. And the point is that you will be prepared for multiple scenarios and ready to take immediate action. So let's go back to our quadrant matrix and let's populate it. So my y-axis on the horizontal is phase 2 will likely be extended. By the way, this is one I did for a client last, I think it was September or October. We had gone from phase 1 to phase 2. We were seating indoors, and we weren't even worried about going backwards at that time. We were worried about phase 2 being extended for several months. And then so that's our x-axis down here, and our vertical y-axis was on-site dining concerns. So essentially, they were worried that demand for inside dining might not be high. Okay, so using these real axes, right? Our y-axis horizontally at the bottom. Excuse me, that's the x-axis. I keep getting these backwards. By the way, I have all three forms of dyslexia. And I like to joke, I'm quite serious. And I like to joke that I'm not dyslexic, I'm lexixic. So that's how I get out of this crap. So the bottom horizontal axis is the x-axis. The vertical axis is, in fact, the y, okay? So in the best case scenario, we have no concerns about consumer. We don't think that the consumers will be concerned about on-site dining, and we believe we're going to move to phase 3. This sounded really probable, 6 months ago. Obviously, things went backwards, and so if we went to scenario 2, that means that we're positive on our vertical y-axis. In other words, we don't believe there's going to be concern for on-site dining, but it's negative. It's a negative outcome with our x-axis in terms of phase 2 being extended. Okay, so this is how simple it can be. When you have your 2 critical uncertainties, then populating the 4 quadrants becomes really simple and straightforward. I mean, this is 2 positive outcomes. This right here is a positive outcome on our y-axis in terms of consumers not concerned about on-site dining, but it is negative when it comes to our x-axis in terms of the phase 2 being extended. Our scenario 3, this is where we have a negative outcome right here for there is concern about consumers about on-site dining, but our x-axis, we're going to move to phase 3, okay? So you can see that you populate the matrix simply by using your critical uncertainties and whether they are positive or negative outcomes. Positive and negative vertically on our y-axis, negative and positive horizontally on our x-axis, okay? And so this last stage is by developing a strategic response. And so your strategic response should be, shouldn't be a book. It should be, a short statement. So this response or solution would be to a positive scenario. So if this were the case, the strategic response would be to hire some of our staff back. Another thing would be to start ordering more supplies, get back and working with our vendors. So there's, strategic responses that would be obvious based on this positive outcome. If we have a positive negative outcome, like we hear in scenario 2, then, essentially, we're not worried. We're not worried that the consumers are coming back. We're worried about phase 2 because here it's positive because we're above the fold here, but we are worried about phase 2 being extended. Okay, and so in this scenario, what they're doing now is they're building outside dining, right? And for 3, you've got a negative in terms of the vertical y-axis, which is this one here means that people are afraid to go on site, but it's positive in terms of phase 2 being extended. And then we have our worst case scenario where everything's negative. And this is literally where you saw restaurants really build up their contactless pickup systems, right? We can't have any dining. We know that consumers aren't comfortable with that. And you can see a lot of restaurants have effectively really built up their contactless delivery or contactless pickup systems. In fact, we've had some people in this scenario that are actually packaging, pre-packaging food, that would cover you for 3 days that you can actually cook. And so there's been a lot of really great scenarios that people have done. And this would be considered a pivot. We hear a lot about how companies are pivoting and that kind of a thing. So that kind of gives you the idea of scenario. And I hope you're asking lots of questions because I can give you some better clarity there. And again, your vertical axis is your y-axis, and the y-axis, who cares? But in terms of plotting or graphs, and the bottom is always X. It doesn't really matter. Put one of your critical uncertainties vertically and one of them horizontally, and the positive is always going to be the top row, negative bottom row. The positive is always going to be to the right of the matrix, and the negative always on the left. Those conditions never change. So the idea being is once you have actually decided, you can say, well, you know what? We think we're going to be in this area. Consumers are not worried about dining, but in this case, P2 is being extended. We can only seat 25%. So the scenario might be, we're going to keep our outdoor dining open and maybe even have a special menu for the outdoors, with, maybe a free appetizer when the whole table orders drinks. Those are all different sales promotions to drive more traffic. So the idea being is that you develop your action plan based on the scenario or scenarios you feel will be most likely. And as a team, you're going to be able to do that. So I want to start to wind down here, and then we'll get into, we've got a lot of time for Q&A, probably 20 minutes. Scenario planning, though, and this is the good news, it's not limited to times of crisis. We can use the process to create, we can use it to innovate new products or services. We can use it as a forecasting tool to try to guess what the future is going to be. And by the way, I will tell you that the only purpose of economical forecasting is to make astrology look legitimate. And if there are any people that love astrology, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but it is a statistician joke and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, you can use this. Like, let's say you might be in this group and this webinar, and you go, you know what? We've actually survived. I actually have a client, actually a couple clients. In fact, MBA is one of our clients. We do strategic planning for them. But I've got another client that is a remodeler, and things have really improved. They've kind of gone through the fire, and things are getting better. So rather than looking at this as a crisis, they might look at it as a tool to innovate, to strengthen their competitive advantage, or they may look at it to forecast so that they can do budgeting. So by the way, scenario planning's been around for decades. It's just not as popular and not as well known as strategic planning. But you can see, based on this 5-stage approach, it is very, very different than strategic planning. But this is how you can create an impact. And I mean, if you're using it to create and innovate, this is how you can create an impact and strengthen your community. And just as a reminder, you're developing the action plan on what you believe is the most likely scenario. You might do it for a few. I did this process with Boeing about 3 years ago, and they actually gamed an action plan for all 4 scenarios because they weren't sure which one they were going to get hit with. And one of their likely scenarios happened exactly the way it was in the matrix. And so they already had the action plan. They didn't have to wait. They were able to respond immediately. And it made a big difference. So, but I know this is about creating impact and strengthening your community. And, if you can't strengthen your community until you first strengthen your business. And after you strengthen your business, Maybe you want to strengthen your Professional Women Builders Council using this type of an approach. Maybe you want to do something that's industry wide. Certainly, you can take this to your neighborhood or broader community. You can take it to your church. I've actually done scenario planning for a church before. So there's lots of different ways that you can use this framework and this 5-stage approach to not only strengthen your organization, but strengthen the people and institutions around you that are important. So I'm ending lastly. So one of the people I was working with on this, she was saying, give us the transition. And she's not going to like hearing this, but we are not going to transition to back to normal. We will experience the next normal. So I'm in a group of thought leaders on planning and marketing, and there are some people at a national level that I have been reading for decades. Really, Phil Kotler is one of them. Not expecting, unless you're a marketing person, to know him, but he said it's going to be 4 years. Of course, he said this last summer, but it's 4 years before some of our industries experience some normalcy, but we're never going to get back to normal. The language that's being used is the next normal. And once we embrace the next normal, it will feel like normal. So with that, I'm ending a few minutes early. That's always better than ending a few minutes late. And so I know that one of the moderators is looking at all the questions. And son of a gun, we have the same number of people we started with, same number of people we're ending with that we started with. So that's a good sign. Even though I can't figure out my whys from my exes, I'm glad you hung out. But I'm hoping that you're asking questions that I can provide feedback and some free consulting on how you can apply this to strengthen your organization. So and by the way, if you don't want to have your question read to everybody, there's my email address. You can email me privately, no cost. I'm happy to give you some free consulting there. Also, at the end of this presentation, Nicole from Master Builders Association, King and Snohomish County, will actually email all of you this deck. It'll be in a PDF format, but I'm actually going to give this deck no cost. I just want you to get the most value out of your time with us. So with that, I'm going to come up for air and have our moderator share some of the questions. Looks like we have 17, so we might not get through all of them, but some of them are probably similar. Our moderator forgot to unmute.
No, Andrew, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, sure.
All right. And I am searching through all of the comments and chats to find those questions. For myself, it was a great presentation. It's one that personally, I've not really thought of the difference between scenario planning and strategic planning and understood the difference. So for me, that was really good information.
Yeah, even though scenario planning's considered part of the strategic planning family, it's just a completely different approach.
Yeah. All right. One of the other questions we got is regarding advisory groups. When do you advise to building your team?
With regard to advisory groups, can you give me an example of an advisory group?
Hold on, I'm trying to see if we get that. It wasn't my question, it was one from the audience. So hold on here.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate your feedback. So advisory groups. So that could be taken a couple different ways. So as a private enterprise, you could actually have an advisory group of consultants. If you're a nonprofit, you might have an advisory group. So I'm going to take the question as kind of a let's call them a leadership group. And whether it's a board of directors or a group of consultants that advise you, it doesn't matter who the leadership group is, but you bring them together and you start stage one and go through the entire process. And it'll be literally, it just takes a few minutes to come up with your focal point. That's one of the real easy parts. And then the focal point essentially is your lane. That's what you're going to stay focused on. And that's what facilitators like me do, is they keep everybody centered on the focal point issue. But once you end up going through the brainstorming process and you've got your long list of headlines, which are uncertainties, and again, the uncertainties are all external forces outside of your control, right? If we're talking about your products, your people, your promotion, those are internal and controllable conditions. We only use controllable conditions in strategic planning, but we do not with scenario planning. But once you've prioritized it down, sticky dots, so it's a democratic and a fair process, you start putting your two critical uncertainties on that quadrant matrix and populating the quadrants with likely scenarios. It will become a lot less daunting. It'll be, I know this seems really complex, but once you have your critical uncertainties, populating the quadrants is really quite easy. And an advisory group is there to help you and maybe bring some outsider insight. Not knowing exactly what they meant by advisory, I sure hope that addressed the question.
Yeah, I think what she was talking about is a number of us have relatively small internal teams because we're small businesses. So she was thinking teams to kind of create teams within other small businesses that are similar to what you do to create those teams. So like,
I got you. So it would be more than gaming scenarios and strategic responses to an individual organization. It would be to a small group of companies that were in the exact same situation. And then all the teams come together in a way. It's kind of like the rising tide lifts all ships. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Kimberly?
Yeah, I think that's what she was thinking. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you could literally do this. I mean, I assume that, well, I shouldn't assume. Does your PWB council have a board of directors?
We have an executive team.
An executive team. Okay. So how many in the executive team? Is it like 4 or 5 people?
I think there's 7 of us.
7 of you. Okay. So then what I would do is, if you wanted to do this to benefit people in professional women in building, the executive team can do that. The challenge is that you've got various Master Builder Association members have different specialties. Some are general contractors, some are subcontractors. Some focus just on, well, actually most of MBA I think focuses on residential. We don't have very many commercial members, but because so many different construction companies or even associate members have different situations, it may be better that if you have relationships with, say, 5 remodelers, and those remodelers are geographically spread out enough where you're not really fighting over the same territory, only then would you want to bring the ownership of all 5 of those together. I do not recommend doing this with people that represent a direct competitive threat, because essentially you're giving them the same advantage that you're realizing, which doesn't move the needle.
Yeah, so do it with people from different regions that still have this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And with being national, there's obviously that opportunity to reach out and do that. So, all right.
Kimberly, I actually have a question for Andrew.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey,
That was a
Nicole.
great presentation. Thank you. My question was regarding the transition period. Last year, I feel like, we kind of went from normal life to quarantine life with no transition. And I think it affected a lot of people professionally and me personally, losing my complete social life. But I'm wondering, when we go into the next normal, we might have a small transition period. So how should we utilize that transition period?
Well, and what I believe will happen is that rather than having one transition period, we'll have several smaller ones. And because we know that we're just not going to go from phase 2 to phase 4. It's a phased in approach, and we can't determine, different variants of this. So in dealing with any transition period, it's really about taking stock of where you are today and then where you want to be tomorrow. And simply it's drawing. In fact, this is the function of strategic planning. So point A is where you are today. Point B is where you want to be tomorrow, or what your scenarios tell you will eventually happen. We're eventually going to get to a place where we can socialize, and we'll get, if we're able to get to a herd immunity at that 70% benchmark, then things will start to open up. But so strategic planning, where you are today, point A, where you want to be tomorrow, point B. The strategic planning is the process of bridging the gap between where you are and where you want to be. So you can actually plan a transition that way based on populating your scenarios. So some of the more personal things that you were talking about, you and I were talking last week, because we're both, oh, thank you, Sherry. Thank you very much. We were both struggling with, we're both social people, and how that just got turned off. For me, if it's a situation with quarantine, then it's a matter, well, I can tell you what my wife, Sandra, and I did. And by the way, my wife is the CEO of our company. We're in our 24th year. I started this company in 1997 with my wife, and she is just amazing. I started off as the CEO just because I had been a CEO of 3 different companies before that. And we realized that 10 years into this, that she was a lot better CEO than I am, and she is. And so for the last dozen plus years, she's been the CEO. But I'll share something that we did, because we're very social, and we were not only not able to see our friends, we weren't able to see certain people in our families. Our kids are in their late 30s, right? And so they're not part of our household. We went 6 months without being able to see our granddaughter. I mean, if that doesn't hurt, I don't know what does. So we developed all sorts of fun things to do as a family. And we used to do happy hours on Zoom. And so we would do a variety of Zoom things. You can play games on Zoom. There's a whole bunch of games that have been set up for remote play. So what we did is we just identified what are the things that we love doing that will keep us in a good mental space. So I'm not sure if that's the transition you were looking for. And if not, just ask me the question again in a different way.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
All right, perfect. We got another one in the Q&A that says, can scenario planning work well with dysfunctional / antagonistic teams? And how do you make it work?
So I got news for you. No, oh, I love that question. And so this is how I look at it. I remember somebody was talking about a dysfunctional family. And I said, that's redundant. Just call it family. All families are dysfunctional. And the fact is that you can have some of that dysfunction within team players. And you can do scenario planning. It may take a little bit longer, but scenario planning isn't going to fix that issue. So one thing that's really critically important, because I do a lot of leadership training, and I've got like 20 government clients. And so I do a ton of leadership work. And what I can tell you is you have to differentiate between policy and personality. Policy doesn't create your problems. policy is a remedy to problems. You know, policy, procedures. We're a small company, right? We're a virtual company of 25 people, but only 2 of us are on payroll. The other 24 are 1099 contractors. So when we do our strategic planning for our business, it is just Sandra and myself. And so we, even though we're a small company, we actually have an SOW document, you know, standard operating SOP document. By the way, there's X-axis, Y-axis. Did I ever talk about that? Anyway, the point is that we actually have a documented SOP, standard operating procedures, because that's what keeps you from grappling with areas. But in every case, it's about personality that causes the dysfunction. And for that, what I would recommend to whoever brought that up is that they go through some EQ training. I've been doing EQ training for about 4 years now. EQ stands for emotional quotient. And psychologists will tell you that your EQ is more predictive of your success and trajectory than your IQ. And really, it has to do with brain neurology. And I've done lots of work with teams, including city councils or boards that you know, are kind of at each other's throats. And I would suggest that it's more about personality, and EQ teaches you how to become a better communicator, a better leader, and how to incorporate empathy in every relationship that you have. And it's a game changer. So look up, go Google EQ, whoever brought that up.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
But
no,
you know, if you've got a group that's kind of at each other's dysfunctional, then any type of planning you're going to do, the process will be dysfunctional. That doesn't mean the output will be dysfunctional. So if you're used to this dysfunctional team and you've got some personality rubs, go through the process. The process may be a little hairy, but the outcome will be you are developing strategic responses to the most likely scenarios and enabling you to be proactive rather than reactive. The earlier you plan, the more options you have, right? The thing in scenario planning is if you wait till the crisis, then your options are limited. So, and who was going to predict that this COVID thing? I actually got COVID in the middle of January before people were talking about it, because I teach at the University of Washington, and one of my students before the first day of class had just flown in from China, and she had a cold. I just assumed it was a cold, but she gave me COVID and I got through it just fine. I gave my wife COVID. We never were hospitalized. It wasn't dramatic, but we didn't know about it. And so it's really hard to be proactive about something that your society hasn't dealt with since the First World War. The Black Plague, 120 years ago.
Yeah, I know they're comparing it to a number of different things.
Yeah.
Last question I think we've got time for is, what is the hardest part of scenario planning, or what groups have the hardest time doing it successfully?
That's interesting. It's 2 questions, and I really like those questions. The hardest part. So when I'm facilitating this process, the part that I see teams struggle with is actually stage 2, when you're brainstorming, ideas, because they get stuck and they want to talk about their brainstorm. I go, stop, don't talk, just get it down on paper. Most people believe that step 4 is the most difficult, and that is determining the most likely 4 scenarios populated in the quadrants. But after you have landed on your 2 critical uncertainties, step 4 is like paint by the numbers. It's really so I don't know. When you start, as long as you don't skip any of the steps. So I've seen teams struggle with step 2, that brainstorming process, when they're really trying to understand and develop their list of 25 of those external conditions that would have the greatest impact on their enterprise or the situation. The second part of that question was, remind me something about,
What groups have the hardest time doing the scenario planning or successful at it?
that's a really good question. And I have a definite answer for that. And that is board of directors for nonprofits. And the reason I say that, and no, I'm serious. And the reason I say that is that if you own your company, you eat, sleep, breathe your business. You know your business inside and out. When you are a volunteer board member, you really have to rely on staff for a lot of the behind the scenes. And so the way that I mitigate that factor is that when I do scenario planning for not-for-profit boards, I insist that the staff leadership team, you know, the CEO, the department heads, I want her and all of her department heads there, and they are working at a peer level with the board of directors. I mean, I've been chair of lots of large boards like United Way and other ones where, you know, you're dealing with, you know, just millions and millions of dollars. But that's what I insist on as the facilitator, is that the board doesn't do it in a vacuum. The board of directors, in fact, what I think the best scenario for scenario planning is get the executive committee together, which is the top leadership of, you know, it's your immediate past chair, it's your vice chair. Some of the larger organizations have a second vice chair. It's all part of the succession plan, right? Then you've got a treasurer and you got a secretary. So take that executive committee and work with the leadership team. You know, if it's a bigger company, it's the C-suite. But I remember doing planning with United Way, pro bono, obviously, because I'm on the board. It'd be a conflict to make money on it. And we got the executive committee and the staff leadership team together, and it ended well. So that's the problem. And then there's the solution.
Perfect.
I am really impressed how many people we're holding on to. And you know what? Everyone that we've lost has actually typed out a nice little note to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, trying to respect everybody's time, and unfortunately it's with uncertain times, people's.
Oh, we are. We're at the end. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
We're right towards the end. So, but I knew that last question was a really good one. I want to make sure it got asked.
Yeah,
So,
that's very cool. Hey, by the way, these questions are so good. I'm going to give you 100% of the money back you gave me to do this webinar. I'm glad you're laughing. I'm doing this for free because Master Builders is a client, and I have people that I love and care about as clients that are in the PWB Council. You know
Yes.
who you are. I haven't
Yes.
been given permission to say who you are, but you know who you are. You know I adore you. And anyway, so yeah, I'm not charging for this. This is fun. I'm one of those weirdos that really loves this stuff, you know?
No,
I wasn't exaggerating. I have facilitated over 500 events, planning events. 200 of those have been with government.
that could be painful, in my opinion.
Oh, well, if you can handle working with city councils and working with government, you can pretty much do anything.
Yes, I would agree on that one. So once again, I want to thank you, Andrew. That was a phenomenal presentation. Great information. Appreciate being able to get the slides. I don't think I could write quite as fast as you were speaking and putting it up there. So I did want to say thank you for being able to share those.
My pleasure. And Kimberly, it's really good to see you again. I know it's been years, but
it has been. I haven't changed much. Maybe a little longer hair.
Yeah, mine's maybe a little bit shorter. I haven't seen a barber since 1993.
Yeah, I can't say the same.
Well, I'm going to stay on, but I'm going to shut up now and let you close the meeting.
All right, we really do appreciate it, Andrew, and it's as always, it's been a phenomenal speech. And I want to thank once again our sponsor, Earn West, for being our sponsor for the year and making some of these events definitely possible. I also want to thank the MBA King Snow staff for hosting this webinar. We couldn't definitely do it without you guys. And for all of the attendees, we really hope that we will see you at a future PWB event. Stay safe and make sure you check your up to date for new events that are coming up, popping up, and all the stuff at mbaks.com/events. And everybody have a great afternoon and get out and enjoy the sunshine.